Have you ever noticed that certain people always seem to be playing a character? They laugh at the right moments, say the right things, strike the right poses in photos, but when you look into their eyes, there's nobody home. It's like talking to a well-dressed mannequin. Dostoevsky knew this over 150 years ago. He wrote about people who had lost their souls, but continued functioning as if they were alive. The worst part is that today, this has become an epidemic. Maybe you felt this yourself, that you're surrounded by well-groomed ghosts pretending they exist. And maybe you're pretending too. But in this video, we're going to talk about how this happened and what to do to escape from an empty and purposeless life. In his work, Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky created Lucian, a character who perfectly embodies the modern empty soul. Lucian talks about altruism, but is profoundly selfish. He defends progressive ideals, but exploits whoever he can. He presents himself as a man of principles, but has none. He represents the human type that the Russian author most feared, one who has lost all inner substance, but maintains an impeccable facade. For the writer, an empty soul isn't simply someone superficial. It's someone who has completely disconnected from their human essence, but who has developed sophisticated mechanisms to hide this disconnection. It's the person who has learned to simulate all human feelings without actually feeling them, who knows all the right words for every situation, but who has lost the capacity for genuine meaning. The terrible thing about an empty soul is that it functions better socially than a real soul. It never bothers, never questions, never challenges, always says what others want to hear, always behaves as expected. It's predictable, controllable, safe. That's why modern society produces so many empty souls, because they're more useful than real people. Easier to manage, easier to manipulate, easier to exploit. The Russian thinker saw this as a form of spiritual death that keeps the body functioning. The person continues breathing, working, relating, but has lost what made them truly human. The capacity to feel, to question, to suffer, to truly love. The social mask began as protection and became a prison. Dostoevsky explored this deeply in Notes from Underground, where the protagonist lives in constant tension between who he is and who he pretends to be. Initially, we use masks to protect ourselves from rejection, judgment, pain. A child learns early that certain expressions are accepted and others aren't, that certain emotions are welcome and others must be hidden. So they develop an edited version of themselves to present to the world. The problem is that this edited version becomes more real than the original. Over time, the person forgets where the mask ends and where the face begins. For the novelist, this was a specifically modern tragedy. In traditional societies, people had clear social roles, but maintained a preserved core of identity. In modernity, roles multiplied infinitely. You have to be one person at work, another at home, another on social media, another with friends, and each context demands a different performance, until you no longer know which one is real. The mask becomes second nature because it's constantly reinforced. Every time you use it and gain approval, it strengthens. Every time you try to remove it and encounter resistance, it solidifies more until you reach a point where removing it would be like tearing off your own skin. The genuine person underneath has atrophied so much that they seem to no longer exist. The author knew that recovering the true face was possible, but required almost heroic courage because it meant accepting being rejected for the real version of yourself after years of being accepted for the false version. Social media created something that even Dostoevsky couldn't imagine: a global laboratory for testing and perfecting false personas. It's as if all of humanity had become a real-time psychological experiment. What makes social media unique in human history is that it transformed the curation of one's own image into a constant and obsessive activity. Before, you only performed when you were with other people. Now you performed 24 hours a day for an invisible and infinite audience. Every photo is calculated to transmit a specific message. Every text is edited to sound more interesting than it really is. Every moment of life is filtered through the question, will this look good on my profile? The most perverse thing is that social media created quantifiable metrics for validation: likes, comments, views, followers. You can mathematically measure the success of your performance, and this is addictive. You start optimizing your life, not for your happiness, but for your online performance. You choose experiences that will yield good content, cultivate relationships that look good in photos, develop opinions that generate engagement. The Russian writer would understand this as an extreme form of alienation. The person no longer lives their own life. They live the life their audience expects them to live. And the most bizarre thing is that this audience is formed by other people doing exactly the same thing. It's a theater where everyone is an actor and no one is a spectator, where everyone performs but no one truly watches. Result: an entire generation grew up without knowing who they really are when they're not performing. Dostoevsky knew that work could either ennoble or degrade the human being depending on how it was structured. In The Brothers Karamazov, he contrasts monastic work, which connects the person with transcendent purpose, with purely mercantile work that reduces humans to instruments of production. Modern work created a specific form of soul death, the systematic fragmentation of the person. You develop a professional personality that can be completely different from who you are. You learn to speak corporate speak, an artificial language created to avoid any authentic expression. You participate in meetings where everyone pretends that it matters. You celebrate goals that mean nothing to you personally. What happens is a kind of socially accepted schizophrenia. For 8 hours a day, you're one person. In the other 16, you're theoretically supposed to be another. But gradually, the professional person contaminates the rest. You start applying the same mercantile logic to relationships, leisure, dreams. Everything becomes ROI, KPIs, productivity, efficiency. The language of the market invades intimate life until there's no space left for anything genuinely human. The thinker predicted that when work disconnects completely from any higher purpose, whether spiritual, artistic, or communal, it becomes a machine for producing empty souls. People who function perfectly as economic cogs, but who have lost any sense of personal meaning, who measure their value by the numbers they produce and not by the kind of human being they are, and who reach the end of life having built an impressive career, but an empty identity. In Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky showed how relationships can become psychological transactions, where each person uses the other to confirm their own image. Raskolnikov doesn't love Sonia. He needs her to feel morally superior, even after the murder. This is exactly what happens in modern relationships when people lose the capacity for genuine intimacy. Relationships become a constant negotiation where each person offers a performance in exchange for validation. You don't show who you really are. You show the version that will get you what you need from the other, and the other does the same. Result: two lonely people pretending not to be alone. What the author understood is that real relationships require real vulnerability. They require showing your ugly parts, your contradictions, your fears. They require accepting that the other also has a shadow side. But empty souls can't do this because they've lost contact with their own depth. They can only present superficial versions of themselves. So, relationships get stuck on the surface. Everyone very polite, very understanding, very mature, but no one really present. No one really connected. That's why so many people feel lonely even when they're in relationships, because they're relating to personas, not people. They're loving edited versions, not complete human beings. The Russian master knew that true love only happens when two people have the courage to show themselves whole, with light and shadow. But this first requires that each one knows themselves whole. And empty souls have lost this capacity for deep self-knowledge. Modern consumerism is the religion of empty souls, but not in the obvious way everyone criticizes. Dostoevsky would understand consumerism as something much more subtle and dangerous, a way of outsourcing identity construction. In Demons, he showed how ideologies can possess people and make them act against their nature. Consumerism does something similar. It replaces the difficult task of discovering who you are with the easy task of buying a ready-made identity. Every product comes with an attached personality. Buying an iPhone isn't just acquiring a phone. It's adopting an aesthetic, a philosophy, a tribe. Buying Nike isn't just buying shoes. It's buying the just do it narrative. Buying BMW isn't just buying a car. It's buying status and sophistication. What consumerism really sells are prefabricated pieces of identity. And for empty souls, this is irresistible. It's much easier to buy a personality than to develop one. It's much faster to adopt a brand than to discover your own values. The problem is that purchased identity doesn't stick. It's like a costume you can wear, but that never becomes part of you. That's why the addiction you need to constantly buy new pieces of identity to maintain the illusion that you exist. The writer knew that real identity comes from within. It comes from confronting your own contradictions, from the work of integrating light and shadow, from the courage to accept your limitations and potentialities. It's a long, difficult, sometimes painful process, but it's the only one that produces a solid personality, one that doesn't need constant external validation to maintain itself. Dostoevsky was deeply religious, but also deeply critical of religion when it became social performance. In The Brothers Karamazov, he contrasts the genuine faith of the elder Zosima with the hypocritical religiosity of other characters. For him, true religion transformed the person from within. False religion only changed external behavior. Today, this manifests in an even more extreme way. Religion became a personal brand. People display their faith like they display any other achievement. They post verses, check in at church, wear religious symbols as fashion accessories. But when you look at how they live during the week, there's no difference between them and any secular person. Religion didn't transform them. It just gave them another layer of performance. What the Russian thinker feared was exactly this, that religion would become another way to avoid encountering oneself instead of facilitating it. Another social mask instead of a path to authenticity. He knew that genuine faith was disturbing, uncomfortable, transformative, that it required the person to confront their own contradictions, accept their limitations, open themselves to mystery. Religion as performance avoids all of this. It offers the sensation of moral superiority without demanding real transformation. It offers community without demanding vulnerability. It offers ready answers without demanding genuine questions. Result: people who talk about God but who never developed a real relationship with the sacred, who know doctrines but don't know themselves, who use religion to hide from real spiritual work instead of engaging with it. Digital influencers are the false prophets of the era of empty souls, but not because they're superficial, because they've developed a sophisticated form of existential parasitism. They discovered how to monetize other people's emptiness, how to transform people's lack of purpose into a captive audience. Dostoevsky wrote about false prophets and demons, people who promised salvation but only brought more confusion. Modern influences do something similar. They promise authenticity, but deliver only more polished versions of the same falsity. What makes influences particularly dangerous for empty souls is that they offer a solution that seems real, but is completely superficial. They promise you can transform yourself by consuming their content, that you can find purpose by following their steps, that you can become happy by adopting their lifestyle. But all of this is external. None of this requires you to do the real internal work of knowing yourself. That's why people can follow hundreds of personal development influences and remain exactly where they were, because they're trying to solve an internal problem with external solutions. The Russian author would understand influences as a modern version of the demons that possess people. They enter your mind through content and gradually replace your inner voice with theirs. You stop asking yourself what you want from life and start asking yourself what they would do in your place. You stop seeking answers within yourself and start seeking answers in their posts. It's a subtle but effective form of mental colonization, and it works because empty souls have lost contact with their own inner wisdom. They need external references to know what to think, feel, do. Dostoevsky knew that genuine conversations were a form of spiritual communion. In his works, moments of authentic dialogue are always transformative. When Raskolnikov finally opens up to Sonia, when Ivan confesses his doubts to Alyosha, when the underground man exposes his contradictions. Today we've completely lost this art of real conversation. We've developed an elaborate vocabulary to avoid any subject that might expose us. We talk a lot, but don't communicate anything important. Modern conversations function as social anesthesia. They occupy the space of silence without creating real connection. They're like white noise to muffle loneliness. People talk about everything, work, politics, entertainment, consumption, but never about what really matters, what they feel when they're alone, what they're afraid of, what truly moves them, where they find meaning. Because talking about this would require that they first know the answers. And empty souls don't know. That's why they prefer to stay on the surface. It's safer, and everyone makes a tacit agreement to keep conversations superficial. No one asks inconvenient questions. No one goes too deep. Everyone cooperates to maintain the illusion that they're connecting when they're really just passing time together. The novelist saw this as a form of disguised isolation. People who spend all day talking but never really meet, who talk incessantly but never really communicate, who are always accompanied but always lonely. For him, a real conversation was almost a sacrament. It was the moment when two souls touched through words. But this only happens when both have the courage to remove their masks. Dostoevsky explored deeply in Notes from Underground how fear of solitude can push people into situations and relationships that diminish them. The underground man prefers the company of people he despises to being alone with his thoughts. This is exactly what happens today on a massive scale. People are so afraid of being alone that they accept any kind of company, even if it's toxic or empty. They develop a pathological dependence on the presence of others, even when that presence adds nothing to their lives. The problem is that this flight from solitude prevents the development of inner life. You only discover who you really are when you stop hiding behind others. You only develop your own voice when you stop listening only to external voices. You only find your answers when you stop seeking ready-made answers outside yourself. But empty souls have lost the capacity to be with themselves. Silence became a threat because it reveals inner emptiness. The absence of others became synonymous with non-existence because they depend on others' gaze to feel real. So they accept superficial relationships, toxic environments, degrading situations, anything to avoid facing solitude. The author knew that well-lived solitude was transformative. It was the space where the person could find themselves without external interference, where they could hear their inner voice without the noise of others' expectations, where they could confront their contradictions without having to justify them to anyone. But this requires courage. It requires accepting that maybe you'll discover things about yourself that you don't like. It requires accepting that real growth is a solitary process even when it happens in community. In Demons, Dostoevsky created a prophetic metaphor for modern times. Empty ideologies that possess people and make them act against their basic human nature. Today, these demons have other names, but the mechanism is the same. They're external forces that colonize the mind and replace one's own thinking with ready-made slogans. The social media algorithm is a modern demon. It learns your behavior patterns and gradually shapes what you see, think, and feel, until you no longer know if an opinion is yours or was planted by the algorithm. Advertising is another demon. It creates artificial desires that you come to experience as if they were natural until you can no longer distinguish between what you really want and what you were programmed to want. Social pressure for conformity is another demon. It makes you adapt your opinions, behaviors, and even personality to fit in with the group, until you no longer know who you would be if you weren't trying to please others. The most dangerous thing about these modern demons is that they're invisible. Unlike traditional religious demons, which were easily identifiable as external and evil, modern demons disguise themselves as personal choices. You think you're deciding freely when you're actually being manipulated. You think you're thinking for yourself when you're actually repeating programming. The Russian writer knew that the first step to freeing yourself from demons was recognizing that they exist. Accepting that you're not as free as you imagine, that many of your choices are the result of external influences you don't even perceive. Only then can you begin the work of recovering your real autonomy. The protagonist of Notes from Underground is the perfect portrait of the modern alienated individual. Someone who developed hyper-reflexive consciousness but completely lost the capacity for authentic action. He analyzes everything, criticizes everything, understands everything, but can't live anything genuinely. This is exactly what happened to a large part of the modern urban population. We developed impressive intellectual sophistication, but lost contact with our instinctive nature. We know a lot about psychology, but don't know what we feel. We know a lot about sociology, but don't know how to relate. We know a lot about politics, but don't know how to live in community. The modern underground man is everywhere. It's that person who has an opinion about everything but commits to nothing, who criticizes all available options but creates no alternatives, who complains about everything but acts to change nothing, who thinks they're superior to others but feels inferior to everyone. The underground became a collective mental state, a place where intelligent and sensitive people take refuge when reality becomes unbearable, but which ends up becoming a prison because they lose the capacity to get out of there. Dostoevsky knew that the underground was a necessary stage but not a final destination. It was the place where the person could clearly see all the contradictions and hypocrisies of the world. But it was also the place where they could get lost in resentment and inaction. The way out of the underground required something that intelligence alone couldn't provide. Courage to act even without guarantees, to commit even without certainties, to live even knowing that life is absurd. The search for external validation became a modern addiction, but Dostoevsky understood its deep roots in crime and punishment. Why? Raskolnikov commits murder not for money, but to prove to himself and to the world that he's extraordinary. This need for external confirmation of one's own importance is what drives empty souls today. They've completely outsourced the evaluation of their own worth. They can no longer feel good about themselves without others' approval. It's as if they've lost the internal organ responsible for self-esteem and depend on constant transfusions of external recognition to survive. What makes this particularly pathological in the digital age is that validation became a drug with controlled dosage. Likes, comments, views, followers, everything can be quantified and compared. You can mathematically measure how much you're worth socially, and like any drug, the dose needs to constantly increase to produce the same effect. 10 likes become little when you're used to a 100. 100 become little when you've had 1,000. It's a system that's addictive by design. The Russian thinker knew that this dependence on others' opinions was a form of voluntary slavery. The person hands over control of their self-esteem to others and then becomes hostage to others' moods and whims. If they approve, they feel good. If they criticize, they collapse. Their emotional life becomes completely dependent on external factors they can't control. To free themselves from this dependence, the person needs to develop what he called own consciousness, an inner voice strong enough to evaluate their own worth independent of others' judgment. But this requires knowing yourself deeply, accepting yourself completely, and having the courage to exist even when others don't approve. Dostoevsky predicted in The Brothers Karamazov a society where people would use entertainment to avoid the questions of existence. Ivan Karamazov represents this type, someone who prefers to get lost in intellectual speculations rather than confront the reality of human suffering. Today, this has become a global industry. Modern entertainment isn't just fun, it's systematic, existential anesthesia. It's a sophisticated way of avoiding any confrontation with fundamental questions. Who you are, why you exist, how you should live, what happens when you die. Every series, every movie, every game, every song is carefully calibrated to keep you distracted from these inconvenient questions. The entertainment industry discovered how to hack the brain's reward system to create addiction. Every episode ends with a cliffhanger. Every game is programmed to give intermittent rewards. Every song is built to stick in your mind. The goal isn't to enrich your life, it's to consume your attention, and attention is exactly what you need to develop inner life. You need moments of boredom to question your direction. You need silence to hear your inner voice. You need mental space to process your experiences. But modern entertainment eliminates all these moments. It fills every free second with stimulus. It transforms silence into threat and boredom into emergency. The author knew that boredom was a sign that the soul was alive and seeking meaning, that restlessness was a call for growth, that discomfort with superficiality was a summons to depth. But empty souls learn to medicate these signals with constant entertainment, and then they get trapped in a loop. The more they distract themselves, the emptier they become. The emptier they become, the more they need to distract themselves. Modern politics perfectly realize the dystopian vision that Dostoevsky presented in Demons, a theater where everyone represents convictions they don't have for an audience that knows it's a lie but pretends to believe. Shagalio, one of the characters, foresees a system where a few control the political spectacle, while the masses are kept distracted with artificial controversies. This is exactly what we have today. Politics became entertainment. Politicians are characters interpreting roles written by marketers. Voters are audiences consuming a show they know is fiction. And the media is the stage where this farce unfolds. What makes this particularly perverse is that everyone involved knows it's theater, but they keep pretending it's real. Politicians defend ideas they don't believe to please electoral bases that know they're being deceived. Voters vote for people they despise because they hate the opponents even more. Journalists cover this circus as if it were serious journalism when they know it's just entertainment. The result is a politically infantilized society. People get addicted to constant indignation but never act to solve real problems. They prefer to discuss controversies on social media rather than get involved with their local community. They prefer to hate distant politicians rather than take responsibility for their own life. The writer knew that when politics disconnects completely from people's moral and spiritual reality, it becomes just a sophisticated way of avoiding personal responsibility. Another way to outsource to others the difficult task of creating a meaningful life. Another distraction from the questions that really matter. Identifying empty souls around you is a spiritual survival skill, but Dostoevsky taught us that the diagnosis should be made with compassion, not arrogance. In The Brothers Karamazov, the elder Zosima teaches that everyone bears responsibility for others' sin because everyone is part of the same human fabric. First sign: they live in a constant state of performance but can never explain what or who they're performing for. They constantly ask, "How am I doing?" but never, "Where am I going?" Second, their opinions change drastically depending on the audience, not from intellectual flexibility but from lack of their own core. Third, they consume information compulsively, news, podcasts, self-help books, but never apply anything they learn. It's as if they're always preparing for a life they never start living. Fourth, their relationships are functional, not effective. They relate to people for the utility they offer, not for the humanity they represent. Fifth, they're terrified of silence and solitude, but also can't be genuinely present with others. Sixth, they talk a lot about themselves, but never reveal anything important. It's as if they're telling the biography of a character, not a real person. Seventh, they're addicted to novelty but incapable of depth, always looking for the next experience, the next place, the next person, the next idea without ever going deep into anything. Eighth, they feel constantly threatened by authentic people because authenticity exposes their falsity by contrast. That's why they avoid or attack those who have real substance. But remember, the Russian master taught us that every empty soul was once a real soul that got lost along the way. Therefore, identifying them isn't for judging, but for protecting your own authenticity, and perhaps helping them find their way back to themselves. Dostoevsky knew that choosing authenticity in a society of masks equals choosing voluntary exile. And in Notes from Underground, he mapped exactly the price of this choice. First, you're going to bother people without even trying. Your simple presence will expose others' falsity by contrast. Like light in a dark room, you'll reveal things others preferred to keep hidden. Second, you're going to lose relationships you thought were solid. People who related to your mask will distance themselves when they see your true face. You'll discover that many friendships were just performance compatibilities. Third, you're going to face real solitude, not the disguised solitude everyone lives. But this solitude is different. It's conscious, chosen, inhabited. It's the price of stopping hiding from yourself. Fourth, professionally, you may encounter difficulties. Most environments value conformity above all. An authentic person is unpredictable, and unpredictable is seen as a threat to control. Fifth, you're going to question everything you accepted before without thinking. And questioning is uncomfortable. It's easier to follow social script than to write your own screenplay. Sixth, you're going to become responsible for your own life in a way that's scary. You can no longer blame others for the choices you made. Seventh, you're going to discover parts of yourself you don't like. Authenticity includes accepting your shadow, not just showing your light. Eighth, you're going to feel like a foreigner in your own culture, as if you spoke a language few understand. But the Russian thinker also taught us that this price is worth it, because even a difficult authentic life is infinitely superior to an easy false life. because discovering who you really are is worth more than all the approval in the world, and because finding other real people compensates for the loss of all the false people in crime and punishment. Dostoevsky showed how suffering can either destroy or transform, depending on how the person relates to it. Raskolnikov initially tries to avoid the psychological suffering of what he did, but only finds peace when he stops running and accepts facing the pain. For the author, suffering was the great awakener of the sleeping soul, not because he romanticized pain, but because he observed that moments of crisis force the person to confront truths they normally avoid. When you're truly suffering, not the superficial drama of daily life, but real suffering that shakes your foundations, you stop worrying about appearances. You stop trying to impress others. You stop pretending everything's okay. And in this forced vulnerability, the real soul appears. Suffering has the unique power to break all the psychological defenses we build to avoid the truth about ourselves. It forces honesty when everything else allows lies. That's why people who never suffered can be cruel without realizing it. They haven't developed the empathy that only comes from personal experience of pain. The writer wasn't saying we should seek suffering. He was saying that when it comes, and it always comes, we can choose what to do with it. We can use it to become more bitter or more compassionate, more closed or more open, harder or more human. The choice determines whether suffering destroys us or rebuilds us. He saw suffering as a form of death and rebirth. The person who enters the crisis isn't the same one who comes out. If they allow suffering to transform them instead of just surviving it, they can emerge more real, more connected to themselves, more capable of genuine love. That's why in all the author's works, the wisest and most compassionate characters are those who learn to transform their pain into wisdom. Escaping the circle of empty souls requires a strategy that Dostoevsky outlined through his most well-resolved characters, like the elder Zosima in The Brothers Karamazov. First step, develop a practice of conscious solitude. Not solitude as escape from others, but as encounter with yourself. Set aside regular time to be alone without entertainment, without distractions, just you and your thoughts. Second, cultivate relationships based on truth, not convenience. This means being selective, preferring quality to quantity, accepting that having few real friends is better than having many false friends. Third, develop spiritual discernment, the ability to distinguish between what feeds your soul and what drains it. This applies to people, activities, information, entertainment. Fourth, practice radical honesty with yourself. Stop lying to yourself about your motivations, feelings, desires. Accept your contradictions without trying to resolve them prematurely. Fifth, create rituals of personal meaning, practices that connect you with something greater than yourself, whether through art, nature, spirituality, service to others. Sixth, learn to say no without justifying. Your energy is limited and precious. Protect it like you would protect a treasure. Seventh, seek challenges that reveal who you are under pressure. Situations that test your values, not just your skills. Eighth, accept that real growth is uncomfortable. If you always feel comfortable, you're probably not growing. Ninth, find a cause greater than yourself, but one that's genuinely yours, not something others expect of you. 10th, be patient. Finding your tribe of authentic people can take time, but when it happens, you'll recognize it immediately. It's like recognizing your native language after years of hearing foreign languages. Dostoevsky understood that in times of generalized falsity, being real becomes a revolutionary act. In Demons, he showed how systems based on lies can only be contested by people who refuse to lie. The courage to be real in a world of pretense is the most effective form of passive resistance that exists. You don't need to attack others' falsity. You just need to stop participating in it. When you refuse to wear a mask, you automatically reveal that others are wearing them. When you refuse to fake enthusiasm, you automatically expose the false enthusiasm around you. When you refuse to repeat opinions that aren't yours, you automatically question the authenticity of others' opinions. This form of resistance is powerful because it's silent. You're not attacking anyone, you're just being yourself. But in a world of performers, authenticity is disruptive. It breaks the collective script. It forces others to question themselves. It creates waves that spread beyond what you can see. The author knew that real social change always began with individuals who had the courage to stop pretending, who refused to participate in the collective farce, who chose the difficulty of being real instead of the ease of being false. But this choice requires courage, because you're going to feel alone at first. You're going to question whether it wouldn't be easier to go back to performing. You're going to wonder if it's worth bothering so many people just by being yourself. The answer is yes. It's worth it because every person who stops pretending gives permission for others to stop too. Because authenticity is contagious in the same way that falsity is. Because when you choose to be real, you're choosing not just your own liberation, but contributing to collective liberation. You're proving that it's possible to live differently. And in an era where everyone repeats that there is no alternative, being your own alternative is the most radical political act that exists. Dostoevsky left us something precious for living in a society of empty souls. Don't become one of them. The world will try to convince you that pretending is safer, easier, smarter. But he knew that this is the lie that kills from within. That preserving the soul in an era of generalized falsity is both an act of personal courage and political resistance. The choice is before you at every moment. You can continue performing for audiences that don't even care about the spectacle, or you can have the revolutionary courage to simply exist. Remember, in a society of masks, showing your face is the most radical act that exists. If this video awakens something real in you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who still has a soul to save. In the comments, tell me when was the last time you took off all your masks and what did you discover about yourself?